This video is to talk about ratio notation and some of the different types of ratios we can write. So here we see the candidates and how many votes they received for class president. And we have 3 different candidates and the number of votes they received. So we have 2 different types of ratios. We have part-to-part ratios. When we compare part to part, we're comparing a part of the votes to another part of the votes. For example, 124 in comparison to 109 would be a part-to-part ratio because it compares this part to this part. Any 2 numbers we choose here, 109 compared to 111, that's another part-to-part ratio. 111 compared to 124, that's another part-to-part ratio. A part-to-part ratio is not to be confused with a fraction. A part-to-part ratio is not a fraction because a fraction is comparing a part to a total. So when we talk about a fraction, that means we need to know the total number of votes that were cast for class president. So we would need to add to come up with the total. 124 plus 109 plus 111 gives me 344, and that's the total. So the only way to write a fraction is to write a part to whole ratio. A part to whole can say, all right, well, what fraction of the votes did Rosalia receive? Rosalia received 124 out of 344. So yes, that is a part-to-part ratio, and it can be called a fraction, where if we said 124 to 109, that is a part, Rosalia's part, to part, Jocelyn's part, and that is not a fraction. What fraction of the votes did Danny receive? Danny received 111 out of 344. We have to be very careful to read the questions and very carefully. Sometimes you have to read them more than one time so that you see exactly what the question is asking. Suppose 4 more people voted and they all voted for Jocelyn. 4 more people voted for Jocelyn. So I'm going to add 4 to Jocelyn. What fraction means out of the total of the votes would be for Jocelyn? Well, if 4 more people voted, did the total change? Yes, because 4 more people voted. So we would have a total of 344 plus 4. And if we're talking about the fraction of the votes that were for Jocelyn, we would have 4 more for Jocelyn, which would be 109 plus 4. So the fraction would be 113 out of 348. Notice that 4 more people voting is going to affect not only Jocelyn's number, but also the total number of votes. Now, if we said what fractions of the votes would have been for Danny, we wouldn't have added 4 because Danny didn't get any of the votes. So Danny's fraction would be 111, but we would have added 4 to the denominator because the total would have changed because 4 more people voted. So again, they always have a question where they're giving you very specific information. They're using keywords from the lesson, and you have to pay close attention and even read the question more than one time to be sure you're understanding. Let's look at another example. Mrs. Rodriguez has 24 students in her class. So that is a total. 14 of the students are boys. So we have 24 total, 14 boys. So why don't I keep going? If 14 are boys, then couldn't I keep going and say, well, how many are girls? 24 minus 14 is 10. So we have a 24 in all. If 14 are boys, then that means 10 are girls. So we can come up with all sorts of ratios here. We could also come up with fractions by doing a part to whole. So like 14 out of 24 boys. The fraction of girls is 10 out of 24. Those are fractions, but they're also ratios. Let's read the question and see what they're asking. Jeff claims that the ratio of boys to girls in this class must be 7 to 12. Well, let's figure out what is the ratio of boys to girls. So I'm writing out, they want boys first, and order matters. There are 14 boys to girls. There must be 10 girls if there are 14 boys because there were 24 in all. So that would be, if we simplified 14 over 10, that would be 7 over 5. So we see that Jeff has the wrong answer. How might Jeff have gotten 7 to 12? Well, let's try a different ratio. What if we did boys to total? That would be 14 boys to 24 in all. 14 over 24 simplifies to 7 over 12. So it looks like Jeff used the total as his denominator. That's what he was comparing it to, whereas he was trying to come up with the ratio of boys to girls. So Jeff made the mistake of comparing boys to total instead of boys to girls. And it is very important to pay attention to what the order is and what they're asking for. They were asking for this part to part, and instead he did a part to whole or fraction.